Just kidding, nothing's in here. I just liked the cup. I already had my coffee this morning. I can't have more than a cup, otherwise I'll be climbing up the walls. Today I'm feeling strong adult toddler energy. I got the pigtails, I got the toddler dress. I don't know what I'm thinking. You know, I haven't left my house in 2 weeks. Full disclosure, this is maybe the second or third time that I have sat down to film this video, hypercritical about myself. We are doing Federalist number 8 today, and I thought that I would add a little something different because I'm getting a lot of feedback on my videos. Super awesome, super cool. I noticed that a lot of people are reading these Federalist papers either for self-study or for school or just with other friends and family. Love that. Keep reading. That's what we're here for. But what I wanted to make it a little bit easier for you to follow along with the paper and my video. So what I'm gonna start doing is you're gonna see in the corner a little P1, P2. That is going to correspond with the paragraph in the Federalist paper that I'm talking about. So that way, if you want to pause the video and then read the paragraph and then listen to what I'm saying, perhaps we can come to a deeper understanding together. I am not a historian. Don't know if that wasn't already obvious, but the whole purpose of Federalist Explained, it's to show people that regardless of whether or not you understand all of the historical context, you can understand what the writer is trying to portray. In this case, Federalist 8 is Hamilton, and then we also have James Madison and John Jay. If you watch the other videos, you probably know, and you're tired of hearing it, but we have new people coming here every single day. As you can see, I now have 85 subscribers. Are you my bookworms? I like that. Every YouTuber has like their name for the people that watch them. Maybe you're my bookworms. Tell me what you think in the comments. Anyways, yeah, I'm really trying to figure out, for your guys' sake, for the people that are watching every video that I put out, which is like really cool. Thank you for the support. That's awesome. I don't know how you found me, but that's awesome that you did. I am trying to figure out how to put these videos out more quickly. So, let's get into it. So Federalist number 8, entitled The Consequences of Hostilities Between the States, was published November 20th, 1787. Again, all these papers were authored by Publius, that is the pen name that Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay used when they penned these papers, because they did work in concert with one another to write them and release them. 3 or 4 a week were being published, so these were being written fairly quickly and sent to the newspapers fairly quickly. Each paper kind of builds off of the last paper. The last couple of papers were about what could happen should the Union break apart. And they make the case that it is going to result in war. Now, obviously we know that war is bad. We don't like war. But he is going to start to lay out in this paper specifically what the problem with war between the states are and how it negatively impacts the inhabitants that live in these states, because most of the people that live in this country have nothing to do with government and they aren't in the military. So he starts off in paragraph 1 just kind of wrapping up all of the arguments that they've made up to this point. The General Confederacy, so all of the states together, would be subject to the vicissitudes. I love that word. I don't know if I'm saying it right. I'm bad with pronunciation. I'm a reader, not a speaker, okay? Of peace and war, of friendship and enmity with each other, which have fallen to the lot of all neighboring nations not united under one government. We're gonna be getting into discussions about Europe in this paper. That's what Europe is. It's a bunch of neighboring nations not united under one government, which is why so often he uses them as an example. But we're gonna get into some really interesting, not only similarities between the countries in Europe, but the major differences between the countries in Europe and what would be the states in the United States. We've already up to this point established that war is going to happen, and one of the consequences is the fact that there's always going to be a standing army. And first we discuss the continent of Europe, how many of these countries have armies always kept afoot. Though they bear a malignant aspect to liberty and economy, meaning it's not good for the people's liberties and rights, and it's really not that great for the economy. And to preventing that rapid desolation which used to mark the progress of war. They are really good at preventing war from escalating into bigger situations because you're ready at the defensive. The art of fortification has contributed to the same end, so just being ready to go can often cause war. I mean, we know how men are. We talked about it last episode. Men are the problem. Send them all to Mars. No, I'm just kidding. I need my husband. He does everything for me. The nations of Europe are encircled with chains of fortified places which mutually obstruct invasion. You can't attack me, and I can't attack you. Similar impediments occur at every step to exhaust the strength and delay the progress of an invader. So we're talking about fences, we're talking about guard posts, we're talking about standing armies. It's not because we expect that this is going to completely stop any invasion, but it is going to inhibit the invader to give the country enough time to come to the defense of their country. Formally, an invading army would penetrate into the heart of a neighboring country almost as soon as intelligence of its approach could be received. The capital, right? The biggest city that they have. By the time they heard that an army was coming, they would already be getting attacked. But now a comparatively small force of disciplined troops acting on the defensive with the aid of the posts is able to impede and finally to frustrate the enterprise of one much more considerable. So now that we're ready and prepared, having a standing army, it allows us to attack us. Why do I keep saying us? I always want to include myself. The history of war in that quarter of the globe is no longer a history of nations subdued and empires overturned, but of towns taken and retaken, of battles that decide nothing, of retreats more beneficial than victories, of much effort and a little acquisition. This is really interesting. What he's saying is that Europe has gotten to the point where because they are so ready and because these separate countries have all the fortification built up in their respective countries, they have posts, they have standing armies, they have money, they have resources, they could stop an invading army before they actually can take over the country. Now what we see happening at this time is really just small towns on the outskirts being taken and then retaken back. So it's a lot of resources, a lot of effort, and not a whole lot of trade-off. Obviously, if you're living on one of these little outskirts towns, life isn't very good for you. You never really feel safe. But anyways, that's not what we're talking about here. I did also think it was interesting that he mentioned of retreats more beneficial than victories, because actually right here in the United States during the Revolutionary War, which if you want to know more about the Revolutionary War and how it started in 1776, I highly recommend David McCullough's book, 1776. It is a page turner. The reason that we won against Great Britain was really because we knew when to retreat, and that's an interesting point that he makes out. That's not always how war was. It was all about how you could attack the enemy and really have a show of strength. That's why we are where we are today. That's why we have the United States as it exists today, because the United States and George Washington and his army knew when to retreat and when to attack. But in this country, it would be a lot different because it's a very new country, very new states. The populous states would, with little difficulty, overrun their less populous neighbors. Those less populous states aren't going to be fortified with standing armies and have all the resources and have all the posts. There's really not that many people living here. So the people that are living in these less populous states, they're farmers, they're working their land, they're just trying to survive. Life was like the wild, wild west out there. We weren't the rich superpower that we are today. Conquest would be as easy to be made as difficult to be retained. So once you conquered a neighboring state, not you specifically, them. Oh God, I need to work on, what are those called? Are those pronouns? I should know this. It would be easy to conquer, but it would be difficult to be retained, because as soon as you conquer, somebody else is going to come in and conquer and your resources are shot. That's what he's talking about there. War therefore would be desultory and predatory, plunder in all caps, and devastation ever march in the train of irregulars. The calamities of individuals would make the principal figure in the events which would characterize our military exploits. It would just be terrible, flat terrible. Though this is dangerous, safety from external danger is the most powerful director of national conduct, because we'd be weak, we'd be broken. Again, he ended the last paper by saying that the motto of our enemies would be to divide and command. So external dangers would actually end up being a lot scarier than any kind of internal conflict. And ultimately, even the ardent love of liberty will, after time, give way to its dictates. This is an interesting thought, because what he's saying is that this country was founded on liberty, the idea of being free, the idea of having the right to be whoever you want to be, to have religious freedom. But people would be willing to give up liberty over time if they are concerned over the threat of external dangers. Just look at what's been going on for the last year with COVID. People are scared to death, and they're willing to be locked down. They're willing to be told that they can't go out. That is a loss of liberty many people are willing to give up because they are scared of an external threat. So the destruction of life and property, as is the consequence of war, will compel nations the most attached to liberty for repose and security to institutions which have a tendency to destroy their civil and political rights. To be more safe, they at length become willing to run the risk of being less free. Now, the institutions that we're talking about are standing armies and the correspondent appendages of military establishments. According to the Constitution that they've written, it's okay to have standing armies. However, their existence is problematic and uncertain. It may be replied, must inevitably result from a dissolution of the Confederacy. There would be a need to have standing armies in all of the respective states and or confederacies that are formed if the Union were to dissolve, because now you have neighboring nations, and the problems that would arise from having standing armies is frequent war and constant apprehension, which require a state of as constant preparation will infallibly produce them. Being ready for war will inevitably be the cause of war. They would at the same time be necessitated to strengthen the executive arm of the government. We will read later on that the executive arm is supposed to be the weakest branch. The legislative branch, the voice of the people, is supposed to be the strongest branch. So putting that in context, it starts to make sense. In doing which their constitutions would acquire a progressive direction toward monarchy. Now, why did he make this specific reference to monarchy? Because that is what happens when you give the executive branch, which is where the president sits, more and more power. They'll become more like a monarchy out of necessity. And he says that because the people that are anti-federalists, right, they're opposite of the Federalists, and they actually started releasing papers first, but then they couldn't keep up with the flurry of the Federalist papers. But they did not want a centralized federal government because they didn't want what they just escaped from Great Britain. They didn't want to have a ruler that could wave his magic wand and make rulings and dictates. They didn't want that. It's a very interesting argument that Hamilton is making here, that is saying by disuniting the states, you will end up with exactly what you're trying to escape, which is a monarchy. And you'll see that as a common thread through a lot of these papers, that he's saying, I know that you don't want a monarchy, I know that you don't want somebody that is making emotional decisions that end up heavily impacting the citizens themselves in a very negative way, but by having 3 or 4 separate confederacies, or whatever it is that ends up happening should the anti-federalists get their way, you are actually going to be bringing onto yourself exactly what you're trying to escape. It is the nature of war to increase the executive at the expense of the legislative authority. Neither the pride nor the safety of the more important states or confederacies would permit them long to submit to this mortifying and adventitious superiority. Basically, we don't know who's gonna win. It's not that the bigger states with more natural strength are automatically going to conquer the smaller states with less strength. What he's saying is that there is going to be continued conflict. So an objection that might come up is, well, if this is true, then why is it that the ancient republics of Greece didn't have standing armies? And he says, well, this is one explanation. It's that they were very industrious. They were absorbed in the pursuit of gains. So they were building their businesses, they were earning money, they were putting food on their table. And that kind of lifestyle is incompatible with the condition of a nation of soldiers, which was the true condition of the people of those republics. And there's also a big difference between military establishments and a nation that is seldom exposed to internal invasions and in one in which is often subject to them. In the first case, these armies being in the first case rarely if at all called into activity for interior defense, the people are in no danger of being broken to military subordination. This is an interesting point as well. All of it is interesting. That's why I'm reading it, but I'll keep saying that it's interesting, because it is. But what he means to say here is that when people aren't depending on the military day in and day out for protection, they don't feel subordinate to them. They are willing to stand up for themselves. But when you have the threat of an external danger, people are so much more willing to give up these freedoms. The smallness of the army renders the natural strength of the community an overmatch for it. So if the army starts to step out of line, is infringing on the liberties of the people, and the citizens not habituated to look up to the military power for protection or to submit to its oppression, neither love nor fear the soldiery. They don't idolize them, they're not fearful of them. They instead view them with a spirit of jealous acquiescence in a necessary evil. They'll stand up for themselves. They have not been broken. They're not mentally broken. They know their own power. The army isn't big enough to fight against the majority of people all at once. And that's a good thing, because the military works for us, not the other way around. And that's really what makes the whole system so ingenious, is that it's not just checks and balances between the different branches of government, but it's also checks and balances between the power of the government and the power of the people, and having that threat of power from the people should the government try to infringe upon the rights and liberties is important to ensure that the government doesn't try. But when they do, it is the right of the people to fight back. And if the majority of people feel that their rights are being infringed upon and they do come together in a united effort to fight that, they're well within their rights under the Constitution to do such. The inhabitants of territories, often the theater of war, are unavoidably subjected to frequent infringements on their rights, which serve to weaken their sense of those rights. Their rights are so often trampled on and abused that they become accustomed to that happening, and then they kind of start to lose sense of what their rights are. Some could argue that that's happening now in a sense, and it is worrisome to a lot of people. The people are brought to consider the soldiery in the military not only as their protectors, but as their superiors. That's dangerous. And the transition from this disposition to that of considering them masters is neither remote nor difficult, but it's very difficult to prevail upon a people under such impressions to make a bold or effectual resistance to usurpation supported by the military power. Once people already have lost a sense of their rights, it is then very difficult for them to see what's happening to them. And it's very difficult for people to admit that, yes, I'm being controlled by some power that I should have control over and not should have control over me. What the hell? Okay, I was talking about power and control, and the Siri on my laptop just started listening. Great Britain is in an insular situation and a powerful marine guarding it in a great measure against the possibility of foreign invasion, and it supersedes the necessity of a numerous army within the kingdom. There is no reason for there to be a big standing army within the kingdom. They have a small standing army, meaning that if they start to overstep their bounds, the people still have sense of mind to stop it when it becomes too much. And this has contributed to preserve the liberty which that country to this day enjoys. However, on the other hand, if Britain had been situated on the continent and had been compelled, as she would have been by that situation, to make her military establishments at home coextensive with those of the other great powers of Europe, that they all work together, she, like them, would in all probability be, at this day, a victim to the absolute power of a single man, a monarchy. He begins to wrap up this paper by saying that if we're smart enough to preserve the Union, then we may also enjoy the advantages similar to that of an insulated situation. But Europe at the time is a great, well, still today too, Europe is still a great distance from us, and our colonies in our vicinity, so those territories which they still control on the continent, will be likely to continue too much disproportion in strength to be able to give us any dangerous annoyance. So we don't have to worry about them too much. They're not big enough to actually cause any issue. They can easily handle what is already there. So extensive military establishments are not necessary to our security. We don't need to keep a standing army in order to fight off Great Britain. But if we are disunited and the parts should remain separated, or which is most probable, should be thrown together into 2 or 3 confederacies, we should be in a short course of time in the predicament of continental powers of Europe. Our liberties would be a prey to the means of defending ourselves against the ambition and jealousy of each other. We have to fight against each other. We gotta fight against Europe. It makes us very susceptible to external invasions, to internal invasions, and it requires consideration of every prudent and honest man of whatever party, meaning that regardless of what your political beliefs are, you have to see what it is that he's trying to explain. You have to recognize that the United States are infinitely stronger, exponentially stronger than what 3 or 4 separate confederacies under separate governments would be. I guess in this case he says 2 or 3. They go back and forth. They say 3 or 4, 2 or 3. I don't know. I guess it hasn't been decided. But it never needed to be. Good. The rejection of which would in all probability put a final period to the Union. It would end if you reject this US Constitution, if you accept the Articles of Confederation as they are, or if you only slightly alter them, then you can kiss goodbye to the Union. It's not going to exist. It cannot exist under these very weak articles. And every single one of them always has a strong final sentence. I love these final statements that they say. The airy phantoms that flit before the distempered imaginations of some of its adversaries would quickly give place to the more substantial forms of dangers, real, certain, and formidable. The concerns that people have about a strong central government, a strong federal government, federalism. These fears are nothing compared to the very real dangers that will be faced if you do not accept this US Constitution, if you do not accept federalism as the best way to ensure safety and security and the preservation of the liberty and the rights of the people and the inhabitants of the United States. And what a perfect time to end, because my hair tie just snapped in my hair. Anyways, that's it. Let me know how this little paragraph thing worked in the corner if you liked it. I think that it'll work pretty well. And I'll see you later, bookworms. Bye.